Here with us this evening. Joining us is our political commentator, Jason Miller. He's a former Trump campaign senior communications advisor, CNN legal analyst, and former federal prosecutor Laura Coates, CNN political commentator Brian Fallon, who was Hillary Clinton's press secretary, and CNN political analyst Brian Karam, executive editor and the Sentinel newspapers. Thank you all for coming on. So much to discuss. Yet another night this week with a lot of news. Laura, first to you about this New York Times report that came out tonight, and I want to read you a portion of it. It says, President Trump gave firm instructions in March to the White House's top lawyer, stop the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, from recusing himself in the Justice Department's investigation into whether Mr. Trump's associates had helped a Russian campaign to disrupt the 2016 election. The White House counsel, Donald McGahn, carried out the president's orders and lobbied Mr. Sessions to remain in charge of the inquiry, according to two people with knowledge of the episode. So what are the legal implications of an order like this from the president?
Well, the key term here is the White House counsel, not the personal lawyer of the President of the United States. The White House counsel is there to serve the office, not the occupant of that particular office. And so when you have that at the get-go, you realize that the President of the United States believed he could use kind of a marionette function to control who had access and who would be able to give advice to the head of the Department of Justice. That's never been how it's supposed to work. And so from the outset, you see, yet again, with the other contextual clues we've had over the course of, the past 6 to 7 months, you're seeing that the President of the United States seems to fundamentally misunderstand the role and the independence of the Justice Department. And certainly Jeff Sessions, his decision to not accept that request shows that he was following regulations to actually recuse himself. He was more prudent than the president.
And I want to bring in Jason Miller. Jason, the New York Times reports that the president erupted in anger after Sessions recused himself, saying he needed his attorney general to protect him. Protect him from what exactly?
Well, we're seeing a lot from this story of unnamed sources and such, so I think it's important to point out we've got to take that with a little bit of context.
But Jason, we know that he's not happy that Sessions recused himself. He's been public about that part.
Right, and he's absolutely right, because I think what happened was the Attorney General was hearing the chattering folks in Washington saying that he needed to go and recuse himself, and thought that if he did go and recuse himself, that would make those the political opponents die down with their criticism of him. And I think what the president knows is, whether it be from the campaign or in his time as office as president, is that's not going to slow people down at all. All it's going to do is make people double down and say, see, there must be something wrong. So I think President Trump was absolutely right in saying, no, you don't need to go and step aside and recuse yourself. So the president was spot on here.
Brian, you've heard the defense of the president there. Give us your response.
Well, this is, my dad from Kentucky had a saying, I've been to 3 county fairs and a goat wrangling, and I ain't never seen nothing like this. And he didn't call it a goat wrangling. But the point is this presidency hasn't told me once that they've ever made a mistake. I've been in that press room for more than a year now, since before them, and on back to the 80s. This guy has never said he's made a mistake. This guy has never admitted wrongdoing of any sort. This guy has come forward and manipulated, and what you were talking about earlier, he doesn't understand the fundamental ways this government works. And I think it's
And you think that extends to him not understanding the role of the Attorney General?
I think he doesn't understand the role of the federal government. I think he believes that he thinks of himself as a despot or a king, and that we should all be vassals in his vast empire. And that's the impression you get every day when you're in that press room.
Jason, I have to ask you, because this is part of a pattern here of this president seeking, it appears, to undermine this investigation, right? Whether it is telling his attorney general not to recuse himself, whether it is directing, apparently, the attorney general to look for dirt on James Comey. And then, of course, he fires James Comey, and he has said as much in public that he fired James Comey because of the Russia investigation.
Well, hold on, Jim. I got to correct you, because I did go through and read the story twice to make sure I was getting this right. Not only does it not say in the story that the president asked for someone to go and look for dirt on Comey, the allegation was that someone in the Justice Department asked some low-level staffer to do it, and the Justice Department has flat out denied that and said that absolutely did not. No, because it's very important, because if it's not true, then we need to go and make sure that we're being very clear here. So please don't try to to throw shade just because I'm making sure that
I'm not throwing shade. I'm just trying to state facts. The simple fact of the matter is this president has never been truthful about anything in at all during his entire year.
And I'm sorry. Look, I'm sorry that you hate the president so much.
I don't hate anybody. I'm just the guy asking questions.
You started off by criticizing the president.
How can you make the judgment that I hate the guy simply because I ask a question about him and I make notice of the fact that he hasn't been truthful to me? I criticize everyone from that room.
Jason, you haven't answered the fundamental question here, which is that this is part of a pattern of the president taking multiple steps by his own admission to get in the way, it seems, of the Russia investigation. Because he said, for instance, with the firing of James Comey, that's why he did it. He instructed his attorney general to try to get, the White House counsel to instruct the attorney general or encourage him not to recuse himself. It's part of a pattern here, is it not?
It's absolutely his prerogative if he wanted to fire the FBI director. And that's, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the legal experts have come on and talked about it at length. I mean, he can go and fire him anytime he wants. I mean, heck, he could come in and fire the current FBI director tomorrow if he wanted to. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I mean, they serve at the discretion of the President of the United States.
And I want to bring in Fallon here. Brian Fallon, you worked at the Justice Department. How do you see it?
Well, let me go back and correct something that Jason said. He just a couple minutes ago speculated that Jeff Sessions was bowing to pressure from his outside liberal critics by recusing himself. That's nonsense. There's a formal process within the Justice Department where there are career ethics lawyers to whom a political appointee like Jeff Sessions would go and seek their guidance and counsel on how a particular set of circumstances might fit the regulations which govern when an official like Jeff Sessions should recuse himself. So he would have gone through that process, been told point blank, you need to recuse yourself.
Said he was told by career department officials.
Exactly. And for him to have rejected that advice and continued on and not recused himself, he would have lost the confidence at the building. I think he's probably lost it by now anyway.
Not necessarily. There's a chance he may have stayed. And I think he should have gone and stayed for as long as he could have.
So what's clear is that he acted based on the guidance that he was given by the career lawyers whose job it is to give suggestions in these scenarios. And what has he done despite that? He didn't recuse himself, but he's gone about trying to please Trump in every other way, including by deputizing not some random flunky at the Justice Department, Jason, to go ask somebody on the Hill to smear Jim Comey, but a Sessions aide, according to the New York Times report. And I'm sorry, but the spokesperson at the Justice Department who's denying it, she's been caught denying things that have been proven true in the past.
Okay,
They've denied everything.
But look, what we do know, according to the article, Mueller is looking at all of this. This has all been handed over to him. And everything is a piece in the puzzle, as you well know, Laura, including the crafting of that first misleading statement aboard Air Force One that's talked about in Michael Wolff's new book. Wolff writes in the book that the president's legal team thought that statement was an explicit attempt to throw sand into the investigation's gears and that it led one of Mr. Trump's spokesmen to quit because he believed it constituted obstruction of justice. How significant is that?
Extremely significant, because if you were to look at these things as the tendency is by many people who have partisan lenses on, look at it in isolation. You cannot do that. You have all of the context that's been provided to say you have a pattern and a theme here that's emerging of the President of the United States who is having a hand in either crafting or trying to spin a particular narrative, as opposed to providing truth. And that is what the premise of any obstruction of justice charge is going to be. Essentially saying, are you getting in the way of an investigation, in an active investigation? Are you doing all that's within your druthers to try to undermine our ability to seek the truth?
Even if it's lying to the media.
Even if it's well, you can lie to the media anytime you want. Mm-hmm. But remember, and they often do, but remember, at this point in time, they were aware that it wasn't just the media who was listening, it was Robert Mueller. And his very existence and his edict directed at that point in time said that when they were lying to the media, it may be a suggestion that they were trying to have the true audience be Mueller and his team. Now, one would hope that Mueller and his team, and probably are, probably much more well-versed in this than certainly the non-media savvy Trump campaign team was. But this is what Mueller already knows this.
Let me ask you this, but Jason, before you go there, because this gets to an essential legal question here. And I should note that it's not just Michael Wolff's book that has the details of this Air Force One meeting, crafting of what was really a false statement about what that Trump Tower meeting was about, saying it was about adoptions when, in fact, we know that Russians were offering dirt on Hillary Clinton. So that matches what we've reported at CNN as well. From a legal standpoint, if a president crafts a false statement about this with his staff members present and them taking part, from a legal standpoint, does that constitute instructing subordinates to lie?
What it constitutes instructing subordinates to try to not provide forthcoming truth and be forthright in their statements.
Not provide forthcoming truth.
Now, that's very nuanced. And the reason I'm making it a nuanced statement is because Mueller's objective here is to figure out whether a crime has occurred and whether or not somebody is impeding his ability to do that very thing. And so part of the inquiry will always be whether or not somebody has played some very relevant hand in trying to undermine his ability to do so. So if somebody is saying that I'd like you not to be forthcoming, I'd like you not to disclose the truth, even though we know that the FBI probably already had the emails in their possession and the email trail that said this was not just about, Natalia Veselnitskaya talking to them about adoption. It's more than that.
Yeah. And can we go back? Let's keep the facts in order, because we were told in that press room in the beginning there was no collusion, no contact with Russia. Then there was limited contact, and somebody else had contact. Now you've had two people who've pleaded out and two others that have been charged. There's obviously been some contact. And also go back to what the president himself said as a candidate when he encouraged Russia to check into emails from a podium during a public event. So the truth of the matter has always been very different from the narrative that has been spun from the White House. And it's disturbing to anyone in that room who's in search of mere facts to have to sit there and listen to that story change and to be told day after day that we're the fake news, that we're the false media, and then they tell us stories that never pan out.
And you know what? Well, yeah, exactly. Because when you have reporters who go and bundle things all the way up like this and come to their own conclusions and skip way ahead. I mean, let's talk about what you did. I mean, you basically tried to say that back there in your statement a moment ago that people on the campaign were colluding with a foreign entity. What you had is you had a couple of idiots who clearly weren't completely forthcoming when they had their interviews with their FBI. That doesn't mean that the campaign was colluding with a foreign entity. I mean, the fact of the matter is that President Trump won this election. Hey, I'm sorry that Secretary Clinton didn't win. You don't get a do-over. If you want to do it,
Jason, it is true that the president came out and said there was zero contact with any Russians. It was after a report we did. And then it's like a slow drip.
Let's be frank. One of those couple of idiots was his former national security advisor, a three-star general.
One was his son.
That wasn't. That's why he got fired, because he lied.
And the rub of the New York Times story tonight is that whatever you think of the collusion investigation, that there's a very viable obstruction of justice potential charge against the president and members of his senior team. And as a result of what we've learned from the New York Times story tonight, Jeff Sessions is caught up in that. He's at very least a witness based on the attempts to pressure him into recusing himself. And he's potentially on the line himself over potential obstruction, depending on what he may have deputized an aide to go do in terms of smearing Jim Comey. And I think at this point, his tenure is unsalvageable. I mean, I know that Democrats are a little bit betwixt and between. There were a couple of conservatives in the House today that called for Sessions to step down. It's clearly a bad faith attempt to get somebody installed there that can maybe run interference for Donald Trump. Democrats are sort of stuck in this position of trying to defend Jeff Sessions to keep him there because they're worried that Mueller will get fired. I don't think they can abide Jeff Sessions in this job any longer. If we let everything slide, if Jeff Sessions is able to go and kowtow to the president, we can't trust Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, Rod Rosenstein, to do their job and act honorably and stand up to the president when the time comes.
What's important, though, if you go to the Hill today and you were talking to people, that's exactly where they're at. They're like, we don't want Sessions, but it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. What do we get if we push for him to come out? The problem with this administration, there's no viable path for Sessions at this point. He may stay.
However, let me jump in really quick, because we keep talking about this notion of Comey dirt, who asked for it. I want to read from the New York Times what it said and get your analysis. 2 days after Mr. Comey's testimony, an aide to Mr. Sessions approached a Capitol Hill staff member asking whether the staffer had any derogatory information about the FBI director. The Attorney General wanted one negative article a day in the news media about Mr. Comey, according to a person with knowledge of the meeting. Now, we knew that the White House instructed Rosenstein and others to find cause to fire Comey, but going to dig up dirt, an aide of the Attorney General going to dig up dirt so that there are negative news stories day in, day out. Your reaction?
It's unprecedented. It's very scary. that we are even discussing that in this day and age. And when you look at it on the face of it, it speaks to the very depths of depravity that I think we're seeing from this White House.
Well, and again,
Not
first of all, the
since-
DOJ said
not
that didn't
Nixon
happen.
Have we seen
And-
anything like this?
And you wouldn't
this
even
is
need to
only
go-
the third day of the year.
Jason,
It is
I have
true.
to ask you, what's interesting about this is this sounds a lot like what the White House is doing to James Comey today.
Yes.
And has for several months. I mean, it sounds like a consistent strategy because they've been attacking his credibility since the moment they fired him as well.
Wait, are you talking about the former director who leaked his confidential work product to the media and is now working on the book deal and the movie deal and everything else?
We're talking about the FBI director, James Comey, who served under Republican and Democratic administrations for years, frankly. And when, let's be frank, when he was leading the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails, the president praised him repeatedly.
And you know what?
And he
There's
leaked that.
there's no reason to go dig for any dirt, which, of course, the DOJ has said didn't happen. All you have to do is go back and pull quotes from Brian and other folks from the Clinton campaign who spent all of last year bashing him, saying he was doing a terrible job and misdirecting the FBI. And they even try to blame the entire election on former Director
How do you flip
Comey's incompetence.
Well,
And let's
Listen,
not
guys,
forget, the irony here is that if he hadn't fired James Comey, then
There wouldn't be
None of
special
this
there
would
counsel.
wouldn't be
happened.
special counsel,
Right.
and perhaps it wouldn't be where it is. Three
That's-
people charged.
But also
perhaps-
remember, also in the New York Times story tonight, there is a piece of reporting that Reince Priebus's notes are in the possession
We're
of
gonna-
Special Counsel Bob Mueller, and it confirms Jim
We're gonna-
Comey's story.